Our worthy forefathers, let's give them a cheer. To climates unknown did courageously steer. Through oceans to deserts for freedom they came, and dying bequeathed us their freedom and fame. In freedom we're born, and in freedom we'll live. Our purses are ready, steady, friends, steady. Not as slaves, but as free men, our money will give.
This is our first meeting of the fall semester of the Historical Society of Old Abington. And we'll start our meeting, as we start all of our meetings, with a salute to the flag. So stand if you're able, and please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. You may be seated. So, a little introduction, particularly to everyone watching in cable land. This is the Historical Society of Old Abington. We were founded in 1939, so we're celebrating an anniversary this year, a big one. And we cover the historical interests and assets of current-day Abington, Rockland, and Whitman. And for those who don't know all of those towns, and a little bit of Hanover, made up the original town of Abington, established in 1712. But we do a series of 6 conversations throughout the year, 3 in the fall and 3 in the spring. And we plan them over the summer. They're all laid out for the year. And today's is the year 1620, the Pilgrims came over. That's a bizarre turn of a phrase. It's actually from a beginner piano book, the year 1620. And I just assumed everyone knew the melody, and no one does, but that's okay. And the first Sunday in November, November 3rd, I will be speaking on a topic called Architecture by the Plan Book. Every building you see around is not original, is not planned by an architect. They come from somewhere. And it's kind of fun, and I've invited people to do it over the summer through our Facebook page, to kind of play the match game. Here's a picture of a house. How many of them can you find that look just like it? Because they all came from a source. And we're going to talk about some of the sources and some of the buildings that have come from those sources. So that should be an interesting one, I hope. In December, we always try to land in a church. This year, we're landing in the First Baptist Church here in Abington on December 1st. And we'll talk about their history and their building. And speaking about plan book buildings, the sanctuary is pretty much identical to the Universalist Chapel in Essanippi. Who knew? And who knew why? I've never discovered, but that's an interesting one coming. Then we'll take January and February off and come back on the 1st of March, talking about fires and firefighting in the Old Town. Again, that's all 3 towns. I'm excited to do particularly the April 5th one. It's kind of an interesting topic. It came to us through a bunch of different sources. It's called The Business of Dying. Oops, but I mean, each town has its own funeral home, sometimes multiples, and a lot of them are in old homes. And there's a whole tradition about handling death, dating back to the earliest days of settlements in this country, and how they handle today and how they've changed through the years. So we're actually inviting 3 of the funeral directors to come in and talk about their businesses and talk about how things have changed, it's even for them, but talk about the history of the business of dying. And then we will end our spring semester on May 3rd. We're going to do another field trip. We don't do many, but we're going to the GAR Hall in Rockland. Each town had its own Grand Army of the Republic Hall. Whitman's burned. Abington's is now a Buddhist temple. And Rockland's is still there. So we're going to go visit there and talk about the movement and the buildings in general. So we're looking forward to that one. We send out postcards to our membership for each of these programs about a week in advance. And if you want to sponsor a mailing, it's $60. I know because we just did one. And that's a good thing. We're also going to offer something different this year. Some of you don't want to have as much paper clogging your mailboxes and want to be a little more ecologically minded. We're going to say that if you want to opt out of the mailings, send me an email. That way we'll have your email address where to send the information to, and we'll know enough not to send you a postcard anymore. So that's entirely optional, but we're making the option available. We'll make a big deal about it so people know that that's coming up. But that's going on. Also, just upcoming things around town. We're filming this the week before Columbus Day weekend, and Abington is celebrating its big Oktoberfest next weekend. And I don't mention it just because Abington's doing it, but also the Dyer Library, where we are focused and where we are hosted, or maybe the word's not coming, will be open from,
1 to 3.
I think Eileen knows the hours.
1 to 3?
1 to 3 o'clock. They've opened in the past for some of our events and had a nice response, so they're going to continue to do that with us and for us. So we're looking forward to that event. And just please pray for no rain. I looked at the forecast today and it looks like we're in for 40 days and 40 nights of rain. So that wouldn't be a good thing, but we'll see if we can sneak it in and do rain dates if we need to. But I think the Dyer event would happen no matter what because it's indoors, so that's kind of cool. Anyway, on to today's topic. Next year is 2020. Okay, what does that mean? It means 400 years ago, the Pilgrims came over and things started here. Abington is the northernmost fringe of the original Plymouth colony. So this means something to us here in Abington as well. And we're honored to have two speakers here. One's going to jump in to talk a little bit about more of the local goings-on with the local part of the Mayflower Society, and then our primary speaker, Lea, is going to talk about Plymouth in general and perhaps some more general things of the whole society. We'll kind of figure out where the conversation goes when it goes. But I'd like to invite right now Bill Tinney to come up, and also Lea Filson, why don't you join us as well? Make yourselves comfortable. So welcome.
Thank you.
Oh, great to have you both here today. And Bill, I'm going to let you do the introductions when appropriate of Lea. Lee. Is it Lea?
It's Lee.
Okay, but it's spelled L-E...
That's my parents' fault.
Okay.
Sorry.
Well, I'm paying tribute to my aunt and my grandmother, one who added an H to it, and the other who didn't, but they both pronounced it Lea, but that might have been the French pronunciation.
Perhaps, yes.
Perhaps, okay. There's a lot of French in New Orleans, though, isn't there?
There is, but I'm actually from southern Illinois.
Oh,
where
my
there's
goodness.
Lots of cornfields and not a lot of French.
Well, that explains a lot. Anyway, Bill, why don't you get us started?
Okay.
I like to refer to you as the local Grand Poobah, but you have a real title.
I'm governor of the Massachusetts Society of Mayflower Descendants.
Now, do you know why I call him the Grand Poobah? Okay.
And Beth, I inveigled into serving on our board of directors.
Beth Stone? Okay.
So she is invaluable.
Of
She's
course.
my personal editor. Anything that I write goes to Beth first.
She
I'm
serves
notoriously bad with punctuation and grammar.
She serves in that capacity for a lot of people, it turns out.
Yes, she
so-
does, including the General Society.
Okay.
So that's something that not a lot of people would know. So when Doug mentioned this, he asked me initially to talk about what's going on in the Massachusetts Society. And I didn't say much then because actually this was before Lee arrived at her new position. And can you give all of it what you
The
are
title?
now
In Plymouth.
in Plymouth?
Yes, well, the simple way to say it is I'm now the director of tourism in Plymouth, but that includes two organizations. One is called See Plymouth, and that's for the town of Plymouth and promoting everything that happens there. And the other is for the Plymouth County Convention and Visitors Bureau, which includes, by the way, Abington. All of the towns in Plymouth County, as well as the one city, Brockton.
Excellent.
So what's been happening, I guess it's 3 or 4 years since we came and stood outdoors, and it was a beautiful afternoon, and we were in our pilgrim costumes. But anyway, 3 things. First I want to talk to you about is the Brewster book manuscript. The Brewster book as we relate to it, came over on the Mayflower.
This copy?
Yes.
Let's off the crash.
Or a photo facsimile of it. And what it was a 300-page WAST, a notebook, like the books that we give to our kids or our aunts or uncles when you can't get something else for a Christmas present or a birthday present. You open it up and you keep a diary in it. I knew where this book was. It was in an unlocked cement-lined file cabinet. And I had a new deputy governor who didn't know anything at all about the book, and she went looking for it, and we found it. First words out of her mouth, it needs to go into a safe deposit box, which we did do, but not until after we had the original evaluated. And the pricing ranged from $500, $700 to $1.5 million.
For the value of.
For the value of.
Yeah.
And here I had been taking it and thumbing through it.
Touching it, yes.
And so one of our chief goals, which we did accomplish, was the publishing of it in its entirety. On this side, you have what was left. On this side, you have a contemporary translation. What is in it? What to bring, what to ship, what to take with you if you were planning a colony. Hard goods, soft goods.
So it's a blueprint.
It's a blueprint. Latin, which was translated. Something to do with the history of the persecution of the Protestant Belgians by the Catholic Spaniards and how they were going about that. Directions on how to ship a cow from London to Plymouth. Which direction do you face the business end? And how often, literally, do you have to clean, I guess it would be called scuppers? The fact that men, women, and children would drink beer. At first, we thought the beginning of the book was written by William Brewster. Handwriting analysis now says that it was written by Governor Winthrop, the first governor. Both were educated men. Both wrote and spoke Latin. Both were in the publishing business. I think Winthrop actually worked for Brewster. Winslow. I'm glad you're here. Anyway.
We'll edit that, no, I'm kidding.
No, don't. I make mistakes. Not too many.
Oh, okay.
But anyway, this is Beth Anderson Godfrey's copy because I haven't bought one yet. They are available if you're interested, especially if you have a Brewster descendancy. The one thing I had to promise Beth
The famous quote.
was that I would read the quote. The settlement in Plymouth may not by date be the same when we say it's the first colony. It is the first colony to survive. The one in Virginia at Jamestown was in 1606. But they didn't bring families, they didn't bring family members, so therefore it didn't last.
It kind of disappeared, didn't that?
Yes.
Yeah.
So this says, the woman, they are so necessary for a plantation that no man can forget them or will be well without them. And it says, provide at least 2 or 3 sufficient and industrious men, and on from there. So anyway, ladies, the person who wrote this knew what it would take for a colony to survive. It is a trove of genealogical information, and the last person who wrote in it was the man who willed this to the Mayflower Society in Massachusetts, and it was the birth, marriage, and death of his parents. So it's not something for everybody, but there will be a copy here eventually when I donate one.
Thank you. Two, one for the society, one for the tire, of course.
I don't think so.
I can kibitz.
Yeah. Anyway, so I'm going to give this back to Beth because
It's hers.
it's hers. So that was the first thing that we had on our goal to achieve. Currently, we own, as a society, something that we refer to as the Bradford Lot. It's a small plot of land in Kingston, just off of Route 3A. It is the place where the second homes outside of Plymouth were built. And the grand poobahs of the Mayflower Society at the turn of the century, the turn of the last century, not this one, decided that they would buy this plot of land. It's maybe 10,000 square feet, 11,000 square feet. And it was excavated briefly about 30 years or so ago. And everything that was in it wound up at Plymouth Plantation. Somebody in the dark of night decided that they should have custody of it. It was not a vote of a board of trustees or a board of directors, as we call them, the board of assistants, but they went to Plymouth Plantation. So earlier this year, I got a call from a man who heads up the Historical Society in Kingston, the James River Historical Society. Man, he's got to be in his late 80s, early 90s. We have a proposition for you. We would like to excavate. We would like to do an exploration of the Bradford Lot. I happen to know something about it because in the first year of my governorship, we had a complaint from a neighbor saying that there was a branch on a tree on the lot that was going to fall on his house. So I at least had an idea of where it was. So we are currently working towards the excavation of this property. There will be a test dig in the next 2 to 3 weeks. And we've been invited. I'm not going to get down on my hands and knees and scratch in the dirt, but there are some of us who will. We've invited to take part in this excavation. And we are currently looking at storage of these items if they're found, and we think that they will be because they did the radar penetrating survey of it. Will be at Pilgrim Hall, which is the leading pilgrim museum in the world. So that's something we're looking forward to. And the other thing that I want to mention briefly is membership. It's an accident of birth, but the Massachusetts Society is almost 20% of the entire population of the GS General Society of Mayflower Descendants. It's because we have records. Many states do not. Maine records were intact up until 1824 when they separated, and then they did not have to keep birth, marriage, and death records for probably 40 to 50 years.
It's quite a gap.
So the only birth, marriage, and death records that exist would be in family Bibles, in some perhaps town records or church records. So we also are the only society that maintains an office. We have an executive secretary, we have a paid historian, a co-historian, we have a paid genealogist, and we have a clerk who works with them. The reason I tell you that is currently the GSMD has many societies that have shut off their application process because the amount of applications have driven the unpaid part-time historians who have children, husbands, wives, homes, to resign. we are getting those applications. We are getting applications from people from foreign countries, because if it's an application based on one that's been filed by an aunt, uncle, grandparent, spouse, the turnaround that we have on those is approximately 24 hours.
Oh,
The guys we have working, Jay and Steve, are spectacular in what they can accomplish. A well-prepared document, probably a week to 2 weeks, goes from the desk of our historian to the desk of the historian in Plymouth, who actually verifies. But Jay and Steve do not submit anything that they know will not stand a 90% chance of being accepted. So anyway, currently we're receiving applications from people all over the United States. Unfortunately, the GSMD is so inundated, I think they're up to, what, 4 months?
I think it's more like 3.
Well, that's not the latest figure. That's okay.
I got a little rivalry going here.
Lee is the latest, next to the latest member of the Massachusetts Society. So I'm the governor.
There is a little competition going on here, yeah.
We get along well. You can hold a joint membership in 2 societies, or even probably 3. But anyway, if you are interested or know of somebody who's interested, I would say the chance of getting an application approved before the end of 1620 is still very good in Massachusetts. And many states know. They're telling you straight out, there's no way it's going to happen. So if you or somebody you know is a Mayflower descendant who would like to join, get in touch with me or call Jay or Steve at the office. We have an office on Derby Street in Hingham. Look it up. We're online, and we'd like to see you. I'm done.
Well, thank you.
Will we move over?
We can talk. Camera, is this okay? Are we good? You got us?
I got you.
We need both of us. Okay. We can talk across the chair. It's fine.
Okay,
Welcome.
thank you.
Now, before coming here, you were in New Orleans.
I was, yes.
Okay, and you
Yes.
were running Mardi Gras.
Well, I worked in tourism there
Okay.
as well,
And television.
and television, and I also was an officer of the crew of Orpheus, which is one of the Mardi Gras super crews.
Okay, wow. That's exciting stuff. So what brought you north?
Honestly, my Mayflower heritage.
Really?
I had been coming north for many, many years. I'm going into my 15th year on the national board of the General Society of Mayflower Descendants, and I was the Governor General of the Society last term.
Okay.
And during that term, I helped to negotiate the donation of the National Pilgrim Memorial Meeting House to the Society. That's the first parish church that sits on Town Square in Plymouth.
That's the UCC church?
Yes, and it sits on the
UU
location.
church. UU, okay. I knew I was going to get corrected.
Unitarian Universalist.
Absolutely.
It sat on the land, or it sits on the land in the location where the Pilgrims built their first meeting house.
Okay.
It's the 5th structure, but it was built as a memorial to the Mayflower Pilgrims, so it made great sense when their congregation fell to 50
Yeah.
to donate it to the society, who would then take care of it in perpetuity.
Now, are they still meeting there?
They do on scheduled times.
Okay.
It's going to become an education center for the General Society to tell the Mayflower story to all of the people that come and visit. And it's going to be quite something when it's finished. And so anyway, I was so involved in that it just became necessary to be in Plymouth. And I was getting ready to retire, I thought. And so,
Retired quotes.
yes, my husband and I moved to Plymouth so that we could better deal with the meeting house. My husband is also project manager of the meeting house. He is the former dean of the Tulane Architecture School. And and has been so kind as to help us with this project.
Well, we architects just don't know when to quit. You know that by now.
Tell them where your home is in Plymouth.
Okay, we bought an historic home. It's at 27 Leiden Street, and it sits on the location of the Pilgrims' first common house. And in 1620, when they first landed, the first dwelling that they built was the common house, where they stored things and they worshipped, and then later, very sick people were kept.
Yeah.
That common house burned to the ground, and they saved many of the sick pilgrims who were in it from perishing. Then a second one was built, and then from then on, it was a garden plot and many. But the house that's there now is from the mid-1700s.
Oh, wow.
And that's where we live.
Exciting. And I assume there's been some modernization.
Yes.
Yeah,
It has a good kitchen.
It has indoor plumbing, let's
Yes,
start there.
good restrooms and all of that. But the most important part of it, to me, is that it overlooks Town Brook.
Oh,
and
nice.
that was their water source. And so to walk out back and overlook the Town Brook and see where they actually went each day is really pretty meaningful to me as a Mayflower descendant.
Certainly. And you can walk to a lot of things from.
Oh, you can walk
that address,
everywhere.
yeah.
It's right in the heart of the historic
That's
district.
very
So if you walk past, if you're walking up Leiden Street and you see me, wave, and I'll take you to the backyard and show you Town Brook.
Perfect. Absolutely perfect. Now, your new job title is very broad.
Mhm.
You cover a lot of different aspects of things. What is your primary focus at this point? I mean, you must be facing deadlines
Well,
with
obviously-
2020 coming and everything else. So where is the thrust of the work right now?
Obviously, it's 2020.
Yeah.
But not 2020, not only just for the town of Plymouth, but for the entire county and area. In the next 10 years, all the way up the coast, there are going to be towns celebrating their 400th, all the way to 1630, and that's when Boston will celebrate its 400th. And so a lot of those towns that the Pilgrims left and helped to found are also in Plymouth County. And so because the Pilgrims landed in Plymouth, it's a natural tourism destination and really does help the economy of all the other towns as we bring in people and increase the economic picture. Plymouth's tourism is the #1 business in Plymouth. And so my job really is just to direct all that, basically.
I'm also curious, I mean, even as locals, I mean, we know Plymouth Rock, we know the Mayflower 2, we know Plymouth Plantation, which is spelled a little funny, but it's there. We might know Pilgrim Hall, but what does everyone miss that they really should be paying attention to?
Well, I think what they miss is something that hopefully everybody is going to see as we go forward in time. They miss the fact that it's the real, true, authentic place where the Pilgrims actually lived. And Leiden Street is one of the oldest main streets in America because that's where the Pilgrims went every day. They also miss the fact that we have some of the most beautiful sunset cruises you could possibly imagine. There's everything from water sports to going and seeing how cranberries are harvested to, there are many, many things that you could miss. In today's atmosphere, in today's time, Plymouth also has become really kind of trendy. The section in the historic district along Court Street and Main Street now is home to just some incredible restaurants. It's home to some incredible new spirits type businesses like Craft Beer Cellar and Mayflower Brewery and 1620 Winery is now down on the waterfront. So it's it's fitting for millennials as much as it is for all of us history people who love history, and you just can't get enough of it. I mean, if you do love history, there are things going on there every weekend, many nights of the week. so many things to do there.
And where's the best place to learn? Is there a particular website? Is there something to subscribe
Well, if you
to?
want to learn about 2020 and what's coming up, there's a couple of them.
Okay.
One is from my office, and it's called cplymouth.com,
That's pretty
SGE, as in cplymouth.com. And the other is Plymouth 400 Inc. And that particular website, the Plymouth 400 site mostly talks about they have like there are 5 signature events that will happen during 2020. The other website helps you with where to stay, what to do, where to go. And then also, I might suggest that you also go to themayflowersociety.org, because there you can kind of get a feel for the Pilgrims and what's going to be going on in 2020 for the society.
Okay. Excellent. I'm curious, something that has come into the national conscience, I think, more in the past decade, or maybe even more, is the Native American involvement in this. Are they participating? Are they protesting? I mean, how is this interfacing between the cultures?
It's really interesting, and I'm really glad you asked that, because it's a big part of the story this time. The Wampanoag, first of all, a little history. The town of Plymouth was once called Patuxet, and that was a Native American village, and the Pokanoket tribe lived there. That was one of the tribes where Massasoit was their sachem and lived. But through time, all that's changed. The Pokanokets are not federally recognized, but the Mashpee Wampanoags are. The Wampanoag Nation covers a whole lot of territory. And because the Pokanokets are so few now, the Mashpee Wampanoags have kind of become the voice of Native Americans in New England, and at least in our area. And even though the Pilgrims didn't actually deal much with them, because they were over on Cape Cod, and back then that was pretty far apart. But nonetheless, 50 years ago, when this was celebrated, the Wampanoags had asked to make a speech, and when they sent their text in for the speech, they were not allowed to speak. And so it created protests and all sorts of really horrible things, as it should have. And that's when the Day of Mourning was created, and that's the day that the Native Americans get together and march on Thanksgiving, because they feel that there aren't enough people that understand their history. In the meantime, over the last several years, the Mayflower Society has worked very, very hard to try to create relationships, because the one thing that we can say, even though what happened to Native Americans in this country is a very, very sad chapter of our history, the one thing that we can say is that the Mayflower Pilgrims had a 52-year peace with the Wampanoag Nation. That's the way we interpret that 52-year peace, and the way the Wampanoags today interpret it may not be quite the same, but we do agree there was a 52-year peace when we protected each other. That's what the Descendants do agree upon. That, I think, is a good starting point, because I think that if we all do understand that and work from that, it helps us then, for the sad chapter that came later, it helps us to really acknowledge what happened, but also reach out in peace and get along and try to help with that story. I think a lot of forgiveness has to happen on both sides.
So do you see 2020 as perhaps a fresh start for them?
I do, and thank you for pulling me back into where we were going, because I could have talked about this for a long time. But in 2020, sort of a different approach is taken. The Wampanoags have been invited to be a part of it and to speak and to attend all of the things that we go to. It's not just the Wampanoags, though, and it's not the descendants of the Wampanoag tribes and the descendants of the Mayflower Pilgrims, but also remember that beforehand the Pilgrims were first in England. They then escaped. They lived in Amsterdam for a year. Then they went to Leiden, Holland, in the Netherlands for 12 years. They then left Delfshaven, which is the port of Leiden. They came across to the Mayflower at Plymouth, UK, and then sailed for America. And because of that, for this particular commemoration, Plymouth, UK has gotten incredibly involved, as has Leiden, UK. Across the pond from us, they have spent £32 billion to create a whole new library about the Mayflower experience.
Wow.
And they're bringing all the records from wherever they can find to this research center.
Fantastic.
So there's a lot going on. So you could basically say there are 4 nations participating. There's Plymouth, UK, there's Leiden, there is America, and there is the Wampanoag Nation. So yes, they're speaking, and they've got their own stories to tell, etc. And so I can tell you though that for the Mayflower Pilgrims, Descendants, the main message that we're telling people about, which we feel is very, very important to knowing this story, is that first of all, they were the first group that brought families. No one had brought families before. And we actually all agree between the Wampanoag tribe and our ancestors that may have made a difference and may have been why that peace happened, because their families saw our families coming on shore. It was a different dynamic altogether.
Conquerors don't bring families.
That's right. And so
They bring
because of
armies.
that, it may be that helped with the 52-year peace. Now if you bring archaeology into the picture,
Yes.
David Landon at UMass just did a dig this past summer and discovered for the first time that they have actually found where one section of the fort wall was for Plymouth Colony. And they have now found enough evidence that leads them to believe that there were Wampanoag settlements literally on the other side of the wall.
Wow.
And that they used some of the Pilgrims' pots and pans and such in order to craft and to make arrowheads, etc., in order to work with each other and to protect each other. So we may find in future that the relationship was even closer. But for 2020, it is close because we're all telling the story from our own perspectives freely.
Absolutely. That's exciting. I had come across something that, you think you understand a certain part of history and then something new comes across the desk. You know, I didn't know that. And I can't remember what the source was, but it was saying that the Pilgrims settling in Plymouth were coming into an area that was already developed by the local Indians, but the population had been wiped out by disease. Does that ring any bells?
No, that's very true.
Okay.
And they had
Sounds good to me.
They had not been Patuxent had not been in operation for many, many years. And so because of that, the Pilgrims used that, they settled there, they used that area. Later then, after the peace had been established, offered to pay for the land.
Oh, wow.
And you can read about it in Winslow's writings when he says that when that offer was made, the answer was, we've abandoned it. For us, it's a curse because all of our people perish. It's
well,
yours.
They didn't want it.
So they did not wish to go back to that area.
Okay.
So
But,
that's true.
but they had a different concept of land ownership anyway, didn't they? I mean,
Well, they did, yes.
the Europeans coming in have a tradition that we understand, but
Correct.
theirs was different.
It was very different. They felt that land was to be shared and that everyone would use it together. And of course, that's why later, as Plymouth Colony became swallowed up into the Massachusetts Bay Colony, the Winthrop fleet came to Boston, and war started breaking out everywhere, eventually leading to King Philip's War.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, all those land rights were kind of part of it.
Yeah.
And it is a very sad chapter. It's very sad that they had to learn to live in an entirely different way, but the things that also happened to them because of well-meaning colonists and well-meaning missionaries, their families were taken apart. Their children were sent to schools. They went through a lot of things that just seemed today, by today's standards, not really it would not be politically correct in any time.
Yeah.
But it's a sad chapter. But what we have to do is come back to this great American story of the Mayflower Pilgrims. And we have to come back to the fact that the Pilgrims brought families, and the families together the Wampanoags and the Pilgrims were able to live for 52 years until all of the other things started happening.
Politics.
Yes. We have to thank also the Mayflower Compact, that before they came ashore in Provincetown Bay, they signed a document which brought democracy. We are sitting in the cradle of democracy.
Absolutely.
That's a story that's wonderful to tell. It later influenced the Massachusetts Constitution,
Which
and then of course
influenced the U.S.
the
Constitution.
Declaration. Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
And we have also to thank the fact that after that first year, after the Native Americans helped to teach the Mayflower Pilgrims how to plant, at the end of that year with a fine and a good harvest, they had a 3-day festival. And later on down the road, Abraham Lincoln created the great American holiday Thanksgiving as a symbol of what had happened there. So you look at it all, there are good parts, there are bad parts, but you have to be very thankful that there are groups of people now, meeting the Mayflower Descendants and the Mayflower Society, that really wants to keep this story alive so that we all understand how democracy got started and how important it was to the founding of this nation.
And keep it real. I mean, that's the other thing.
And it's authentic. And if I put my tourism hat on, I can tell you that the number one thing that people look for when they travel are experiences and authentic experiences. And you can't get much more authentic than New England.
No, we are it. I've been troubled through the years running across like tour groups and such who have this idealized version of Pilgrims, in particular hats with buckles and shoes with buckles, and it's like, you know, these guys were like nomads. They were a little more rough and tumble than you would like to necessarily believe. Some of them well educated and spoke Latin and everything else.
And that's true.
They're coming from an interesting background, and things were rough.
Yes.
And there's a sanitized version out there that always bugs me. I mean, we know when they came over, they were first in the tip of the Cape and didn't stay there. And then they did stay in Clark's Island, I think, for
just a very short amount of time.
Okay, I thought it was their first season or something. Yeah, okay, and then moved on to the rest of the land from there.
Right, they ended up in Plymouth, mainly because they could land there and it was peaceful waters, and they weren't having to...
Sheltered.
Yes, not having to fight all of the problems they'd had with traveling before. But it can be sanitized, but it's kind of like I was talking to a friend the other day about history itself and about genealogy and how we look and we find out things about people that came before us, whether they're Mayflower descendants or not. You find out that an uncle looks like you or that someone else, and you immediately put your own lens on and assume that you would have been best friends and they would have approved of everything you did.
Probably not.
And the truth of the matter is we've all got scoundrels in our families. We've all got people that probably would have believed diametrically opposing things to us. But it's really fun and that's how I think the sanitization also happens.
I think you're right. I think you're right. We want to project onto them what we wanted them to be.
And then if you look at the ages we've gone through during the period of the Victorians, that's when we became totally
cleansed
perfect.
Everything. Yes.
And so it is so important to look back at history because history is what informs the future. And it's through looking at that history that we can really learn what mistakes not to make in the future.
Exciting. Now, another thing that I'm vaguely aware of is happening, I'm not sure the timeline or anything else, is Mayflower 2 has been undergoing major renovations in Connecticut, perhaps?
Yes, at Mystic Seaport.
That's what I thought.
And it's now been relaunched. It has to go through sea trials.
Okay.
Once that happens,
she's coming back.
She is coming back.
Okay.
She's going to travel to Boston in mid-May to do a 4-day event with the USS Constitution.
Oh, nice.
Which will be a nice way to also bring her back and to help them to raise much-needed funds. And then from there, she will make her way back to Plymouth, her home, and we will be there to welcome her.
Fantastic. Now, have the renovations been so extensive that we have to refer to her as the Mayflower 3? Or
No,
is this a
actually,
fixed up 2?
You know, it's really interesting you should say that because there were many, many Mayflower ships. And they did some research and they have learned that there is no maritime law that says that they can't be called the Mayflower. without anything else.
No additional numbers after?
No numbers,
Okay,
anything.
okay.
The reason they did it to begin with was because in the 50s, they were afraid people would think that was the actual ship.
Yes, of course.
You know, we know now, it's
Sanitized.
way past time, though it could be the actual, so they're dropping the two.
Oh.
And she's now gonna, and I'll
It's
tell
the
you
Mayflower.
officially, for the first time here, she'll be known as the Mayflower.
Fantastic. That's
Going forward.
exciting. And you heard it here first. Excellent. And as I'm turning to the audience, I'm realizing we're just a runaway train here, and I'm
Sorry.
thinking, no, don't apologize. It's wonderful. And audience questions. I mean, as we're talking along here, is there anything particular you want to know about that we've talked about already, or that where we haven't taken the conversation yet? Otherwise, I have a few more questions, but I want to take a moment. Bill,
A couple of points. We know,
we both
being
addressed that.
Mayflower descendants, that it's unlikely the colony would have survived that first winter into the spring without the help of the Native Americans.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And
They know how to do it.
It's not said often
I agree.
enough. And it was those nasty Puritans from Boston who caused all the trouble.
Ah,
Not the Pilgrims.
1630 or something, they came on board.
Not the Pilgrims who were separatists.
And because the Boston folk didn't come here for religious freedom.
Of sorts.
Yeah, okay.
Of
There's
sorts.
there's a difference between Puritan, the Pilgrims were called Puritans because all separatists were put under the same umbrella. But there really is a difference. The Puritans from Boston that would have been on the Winthrop fleet and those ships after believed that they should fix the Church of England, but maintain it. The separatists, which were the Pilgrims, said, we don't
We're
want to be
done.
a part of the Church
We're
of
done.
England. We want to govern ourselves, and we want to worship as we see fit. So there is a big difference. And honestly, Bradford, in his final days, would never have known he was going to have this sort of effect. He actually really was very sad at the end of his life because he thought the experiment had failed because the Massachusetts Bay Colony was swallowing them up.
Yes.
And it was the end of Plymouth Colony. But little did he know that it really ended up, because of his writings and because of his and Winslow's and a few other things, that it would become such an important story to America.
Absolutely. That's good. And Marilyn.
From whom are you descended?
Oh, well, I'm
Good
descended,
question.
I had 8 people that were on the ship. I had Isaac Allerton, his wife Mary Norris Allerton, and the 3-year-old Mary Allerton Cushman. She was later Cushman. But little Mary Allerton, who was 3 or 4 years old, those are 3. I also had Degory Priest, who eventually married Isaac Allerton's sister, was married to Isaac Allerton's sister. I also have Stephen Hopkins and Elizabeth Fisher Hopkins. He's the one that had the shipwreck in Bermuda and was quite a character and got fined for serving beer on Sundays. I also have Francis Cook and Edward Doty. Edward Doty was a servant of Stephen Hopkins. And I only go into that because every one of them have such an incredibly interesting story. If you learn about each and every one of the Pilgrims, you kind of can see some of the reasons that New Englanders are the way New Englanders are, because many of them have many similar traits and such. So it's really fun to learn about the Pilgrims
I
themselves.
agree. Absolutely. Good.
There's a movement underfoot
Uh-oh.
to truly exemplify and expand the knowledge about the women of the Mayflower. And perhaps to me the most interesting one, because she's my ancestor, is the Warren family.
Okay.
That woman kept, as a widow, maintained her widowhood because she could then act as a man as far as owning, selling, inheriting, buying, trading.
If she was a married woman, she was subject to her husband
Right.
for all of that.
And this woman
But she
wound
earned
up,
a status as a widow.
if any of you are familiar with South Plymouth, there's an old campsite there, up on the bluff. She eventually owned all of the land from there down to what is now the Cape Cod
Are
Canal.
you talking like Mennonite or? that area?
No, Ellisville.
Okay.
She put together on her own one of the largest land ownerships known in the New World.
She was quite exceptional.
It sounds it.
But there were
And
others.
savvy.
She came about 3 years later than her husband.
Right.
And what I've wondered, I
That's
know a
John
little bit
Barnes.
about him. I'm probably also a descendant.
Yeah.
Through the churches and when the Burroughs married them and Hingham in the 1670s. But they've, what I've been curious about, she stayed in Leiden for about 3 years with her 4 daughters. And then, so they came over when it was safe. He was a merchant.
Yeah.
And, was she doing business, were they working as a couple, both in business? With the acumen she had, was she continuing to do business in Leiden after he left? They had to do
I
something
wouldn't
to
be
support.
surprised. I don't know that that information exists factually. But the fact was that he died young,
Mhm.
and she was,
They had sons by that point, but they were
and
infants.
the oldest son tried to take it all away from her. And they said no, that she was entitled to every legal aspect of what she accomplished.
And she was Elizabeth for him, wasn't she?
Yes.
So it's
Interesting.
very interesting. She fought to keep
So-
to become one of the proprietors of the colony.
So are we also the cradle of feminism here as well? I mean,
Well, I
It's
think
a
we
story
sounded,
that-
I think we could be, because if you also look at the Winslow family, as Winslow traveled back and forth, often, at one point, he even deeded some of his land to his mother because she was a widow, in order to keep, many times that widowhood was a really good way for women to have more of a say.
Clever.
Same with the Hopkins family.
Yeah.
I mean, there are many instances of female pilgrims that we just didn't know and we're just starting to discover because frankly, no one had researched them
Right.
until the last 10 or 15, 20 years.
Yeah, it's been since 2016 that you could join the Mayflower Society on a woman.
Oh, okay.
And I'm very happy to say that happened under my term.
Yay.
And by the way, I was only the 4th Governor General of the General Society of Mayflower Descendants since 1897. So I was the 4th woman, so
And there isn't a 5th yet, so.
not yet,
Okay.
but I'm hoping.
You're still holding the record. Good for you.
It
That's
may
exciting.
happen this next
Okay.
Congress.
Okay.
I'm
Absolutely.
just-
And we're supporting it.
I'm just
John
wondering
Barnes.
what the legal official information you have to apply to Mayflower Descendants.
I'm sorry, I didn't get the whole question.
Joining.
What the official information you have to have
What you have
before
to
you
have lined up
can,
for
before you can
information.
apply.
Okay.
If you are from Massachusetts, the records are in excellent condition.
Yeah.
So if you know of, first of all, the easiest way is if you have a mother, a father, a
I
grandparent.
have the whole list from William Bradford down, but
All
I
right.
don't have any official documentation.
All you would have to prove is your birth,
Mhm.
if you were married, your husband's marriage and birth certificate, if he's passed away, a death certificate. You might, if you wanted to join, you might only need 4 or 5 things,
Mhm.
because everything else would be a matter of public record and easily available, and printed in books somewhere. The gray books that are out on the shelves out here, which is where I did most of my research and my research for my wife, are fantastic, and they are accepted.
Okay.
And
Where
family,
is your office? You
on
told me.
Derby Street.
On Derby Street.
In Hingham.
Oh, in Hingham, okay.
It's the brick office condos just after you go over the Weymouth line, 175 up on the hill.
Okay.
So the good news in Massachusetts is so much of the research has been done, you only need to tie yourself into one aspect of it, and the rest is already there. So it makes it a lot easier here, I think, than most places. I have a godson in Texas who's interested in, we didn't have a lot of steps to take to say, well, you could do this if you wanted
And the Texas Society they're very active and one of our strongest and largest. So.
And I'll point that out to him, because he still hasn't signed up.
Oh, he should.
I
It's a
think he
fun
should.
group.
He doesn't have a lot of time left.
Okay, you mean forever? Just for 2020. Okay, well, we could talk all day, but we're going to wrap up soon for today's session. I just really wanted to make sure we're covering audience questions before we do. And anything that you guys want to know about that we haven't covered? Or are we really that good? Yes,
I
sir.
mentioned something about the junior membership, a good backlog of
Oh, yes.
future members.
Okay,
Juniors.
my wife, who's standing way in the back,
She's hiding.
is junior membership chairperson for the General Society.
Okay.
And Beth and she are co-chairs of the Junior Society here in Massachusetts. We charge more for our junior membership, but from the age of 4 through the age of 15, 18, every year, these children who are members receive a book that's age appropriate, and not only age appropriate, has been vetted for information.
Good.
And our list has now gone out to many other states throughout the
Who want to
country.
be doing the same thing.
Why redo it?
We also
And-
publish contacts.
And whiting. And Higginbotham whiting. I'm going to use the whole thing. You might be tied into something here.
I was just wondering what people can expect who are coming, it sounds like from all over the country, maybe some from Europe and other places, to the Plymouth area next, well, not next, this coming November,
Yes.
but like a year from
2020.
now. What can they expect besides sunset cruises?
Well,
Like,
there are basically things happening all of the time that are relative to the Pilgrims that you'll be able to look at the website and see on any given day all of the things that you can see. There are also large signature events. The first big signature event, when royalty will come and officials and all of that, will be in April. And that will occur in April, and then in May, there is a maritime event where we'll see tall ships and wooden ships and such in the bay. There's also going to be a Native American march, as well as a conference talking about the relationships of the colony and the Pilgrims, et cetera, and talking about their concerns. There also will be and what they're calling an embarkation festival in September, because Plymouth is so much of an immigrant community. It's not just that we were the first immigrants there as Mayflower Pilgrims, but it also, they've had the Yugoslavian community, the French, the English, the Scottish. They're really a melting pot for immigrants that have come to that area. It's a very diverse area, so there will be a big embarkation festival to talk about all those times and such. That's something else. The Mayflower Descendants are also going to be taking ferries from Boston, Provincetown, and from Plymouth, all to Provincetown Bay, where they're going to drop a wreath in memory of the Pilgrim ancestors. And then the Mayflower 2, I'm catching myself, the ship Mayflower will also be there to do a recreation of the signing of the compact. And then there will be, the Massachusetts Mayflower Society is doing a naturalization ceremony at Memorial Hall, in which there will be people in Mayflower Pilgrim attire that accompanies them in and welcomes them to the new world. 102, because there were 102 people on the ship. And then also the National Pilgrim Memorial Meeting House, which we call the Mayflower Meeting House, is the church that was in Town Square where the Pilgrims first built their meeting house. That will be rededicated during that period. So there are all sorts of things going on, but there are also things for every single day, 7 days a week. You'll be able to come in and look at a calendar and see all of the things relative to that history, as well as all the other things going on.
Also, on Friday nights in July and August at 6 o'clock, if you meet at the Mayflower House, they duplicate the Pilgrim Progress, which occurred the first winter. where a drummer would stop from house to house and pick up all the pilgrims and walk them up Layden Street, up to Burial Hill for a service, and then walk them back to the Mayflower House. And the Mayflower House has authentic costumes, and they will supply them. So you may dress in costume and follow the beat of the drum. And 51 people can do it, because that's how many were alive at the end of the winter. But you do not have to be a descendant
No.
to take part in this.
You can come and wear the attire and do it. And by the way, it may be happening much more than just July and August.
Oh, they're going to add to it, because right now it's just.
You may see
August.
that the schedule is much
That was
larger.
wonderful, wonderful. And call the Mayflower House if you want to do it, or get a hold of Cindy Tinney through here. She can register you, and you can do that, you can walk
You
it.
can use your inside Abington contacts, yes.
Why not? It
Absolutely.
works. It
We're
works.
here.
Yes, right, you got it.
Drop names. I like
Now, I have a question, Lee.
Uh-oh.
He hasn't asked it yet. He and a group of people put on a great show in the fall, encampment
Oh, that's in the spring.
in the spring.
No, yeah. June, actually.
Now, get the stuff to her, and it will find its way onto a site somewhere. Honestly, it's a
Well, we don't
service.
publicize our fireworks, but other than that, yes, we do Flag Day Founders Day here in Abington.
It's a service.
But we weren't founded till relatively new. We were 1712, so that was way
That's
out.
And
way,
you know,
way-
something else too that I should mention that happens every year is Thanksgiving celebration that they have in Plymouth is absolutely amazing. They have a wonderful parade every year. That's followed now in the evenings by a ceremony called the Illumination Ceremony. And everyone starts at the Mayflower Meeting House, where we have different high school groups that sing. We have an a cappella group. We've got like 6 to 8-year-olds who play ukuleles and sing, and they are adorable. We have a few things there to get everybody gathered. And then once they're gathered, everybody carries a flickering candle, which by the way is not a real candle, it's the new kind. And everybody makes a trip down Leyden Street to the waterfront, where there's a really nice program with all sorts of different things happening. So Thanksgiving any year is a wonderful time to come, but especially for the next few years.
I would think. It's exciting stuff. John Burroughs, do you have a general question? Sorry.
More observation. I've been reading economic histories of the Mayflower, and bolsters what you were saying about their connection with the native people originally. The payback for the investors was in sending furs, looking for a source. They wanted to be on a major inland waterway. They landed in a place that didn't have it. They ended up going up to Maine. But King James liked beaver hats. And Russia was going 2,000 miles east of Moscow to get beavers. Beavers had been extinct that far on that continent. And so trying to get to American beavers, and the French were going all the way out to Minnesota. And so trying to get a place, and when the Mayflower Company became successful economically, it was when they started being able to ship large enough amount of beaver hats. So they needed the native tribes to catch the beavers. So there wasn't an interest in pushing them away. They had this strong economic tie.
There was an interdependence.
And at the same time, the Native Americans, truly that tribe many had died and their numbers had dwindled, and they needed the protection too.
Yeah.
And the Pilgrims brought firearms.
It's a
which
very,
they had
very
not been
complex
used. So it's
story.
very interdependent.
Very different from what we learned in school growing up.
Yes.
I think we're all going to learn a lot within the next year or so, because
Yes.
obviously this is going to get major publicity, and I'm pleased that we today have been part of that, as we are on YouTube as well as local cable and everything else, so it's kind of exciting to be learning what we're learning here today. I thank you for joining us. This has been very
Thank you.
illuminating. I'll just use a word you just used. And,
Thanks, it was a pleasure.
quite wonderful. So
Truly an honor to be here.
We'll be following the progress and learning more as we go. So I'm going to invite everyone to join us in the back room for refreshments. I'm going to invite everyone to come back in time for our November program, which I am doing. You'll have to listen to me for an hour or so. And that is November 1st, I believe. Do I have that right? I don't have my glasses on, so I suppose I should do that first. November 3rd, okay?
Good thing you checked.
Absolutely. You can't have it wrong on cable. Anyway, so again, thank you.
Thank you.
And, if you're too shy to ask questions, I think you'll be hanging around for a little bit, so you can ask them face to face. And one other exercise I always do here is how many people in the audience are members of the Historical Society of Old Abington? Raise your hands. Okay, look around to anyone who didn't raise their hands and make them feel welcome. And I'll see you all in the back room, and thank you, and thank you all for being with us.
And join hand in hand, brave Americans all. By uniting we stand, by dividing we fall. In so righteous a cause, let us hope to succeed. For heaven approves of each generous deed.